All right, so we're almost live. Just give me one more second. If I could just ask everyone to mute their microphones. Okay, so I'm pretty sure we are live now. I hope we are. Yes, we are indeed. All right. Hello, everyone. Just to make sure everyone has their microphones muted before we start. And I just wanted to say that the event is being recorded, so it will be available afterwards. And we're also live at Young Talent Management Facebook page. My name is Natalia, and it's a great honor of being a host of today's event, Young Leader Alliance Volume 2 on Sexism and Misogyny in the Modern World. And I thought it would be very useful to do a quick introduction about what Young Leaders Alliance and Global Awareness Movement is for those of you who are not yet familiar with our projects. Young Leaders Alliance is basically one of the initiatives of Global Awareness Movements, but Young Talent Management. And what you're about to find out very soon, or you already know if you've been with us last time, it's basically a platform for young people to speak about the issues of our times, to discuss the most important problems in our societies. And the Global Awareness Movement itself is an initiative through which we really aim to empower young people to tackle the current current issues through different projects. So, for example, through wearing is caring, so wearing masks during the pandemic, Black Lives Matter, and many, many more. Our networks are spreading globally. So currently we have ambassadors from 7 different countries. So we're really, really growing. And if anyone would be interested in joining, I will leave our Instagram account name or my name in the chat so that you can contact us if you wish to do so. Right. So going back to the topic of today's event, sexism and misogyny in the modern world, whether we experience it or not, it's still very prevalent issue. And it's an issue that hasn't been solved, and it's very far from being solved. So I'm hoping that hopefully with the help of our brilliant speakers today, we'll be able to get some deeper insight and greater understanding of the issue. Each of our speakers will have a very different take on sexism, and between each speaker, there will be a floor open for discussion. So please do join in, ask questions, share your views, and really try to take a good use of this opportunity, because it's something very unique. And before we start, I want to say a huge thank you to all of our speakers for joining us today. It's a great privilege to have you with us during this event. And thank you to all of the ambassadors who create the movement and to everyone who did join us today. Now, let me introduce you our first speaker, our special guest speaker, Dr. Leila Hussein, who is a psychotherapist specializing in supporting survivors of sexual abuse. And her talk will focus on race, on patriarchy, and the importance of access to mental health services and well-being. It is a great honor to have you with us, and thank you so much for agreeing to speak today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Natalie, and thank you everyone who joined. I can only imagine a lot of you are zoomed out. And coming on a Saturday, that means I love the idea that people are committed to this even on their day off, and I think that's very important. Before I actually start, I want to come back to a point, Natalie, you said, this sexism and misogyny is an issue and we must deal with it. But I think we need to recognize this has actually been a pandemic itself. So sexism and misogyny is a pandemic that we actually have ignored. And So for me, I think it's important we actually keep remembering that we need to continue talking about this issue. We cannot keep pretending. And I think what COVID-19 has shown all of us, it's the lack that we're still not equal. We don't live in equal society. And the issue around misogyny and sexism has always existed, but what this virus has done is just highlighted it even more. So I wanted to make that point. I think it's important to recognize how important this topic actually is. I wanted to say, hence why it needs to be talked about more. So I want to encourage all of you on this call who have joined us today to start creating more platforms or spaces where this has to be talked about. So again, thank you for having me. And I think this is a very important topic, as I just made it clear. And I wanted to come with the notion of why I became involved in this work. I think a lot of us, when we come on these platforms, it's not one day we woke up and decided to fight misogyny and sexism. It's because I experience it every day. My daughter's experience it. My daughter experiences the same thing. All the women in my life are experiencing this. And my work as a psychotherapist, I'm in a privileged position where I'm hearing the experiences of women every day in different spaces. But especially in the last nearly 18 years now, I have been working with women and girls who've experienced violence, specifically a practice called female genital mutilation, which is, for those who've never heard it, it's when the female genitalia is partially or totally removed and the remaining skin is pulled together and it's stitched from top to bottom. That itself, people might say, is a cultural, religious, or practice. That's not what it is. This is embedded in the patriarchal system, meaning the idea that a woman can be sexually free, it's absolutely not accepted. So when I'm talking about FGM, I have to talk about sexism and misogyny, because this is a misogynistic practice of violence against women and girls. So one, it's important we first of all acknowledge this is a pandemic. Two, that it's something that now this virus has proven over and over again that we absolutely need to ensure that we create a better space for women and girls, because we clearly don't have that. But for my work, in terms of a clinician and as a human rights activist, I'm seeing women who look like me, who are, one, kept away from these conversations, two, not even believed. There's a new term, I'm not sure if any of you have heard of, it's called misogyny noir, meaning this is when Black women that look like me, are experiencing misogyny and racism all at the same time. So it's very important to, again, yes, we are all impacted by this, but it's also to recognize we are all having different types of experiences as well. So my current work, I have been working with women and girls again, specifically Black women and girls who are being impacted by this, what's happening in the world right now. And if I just pull up a note that I put up, give me 1 second. Yeah. So why is that so important, especially when we are talking about race? Race, it's something that we absolutely, I mean, just look at the screen now. You can clearly see I'm Black. We're not going to pretend here and not notice my skin color, and I can see your skin color. So we already recognize each other's privileges in these spaces. And for me, what you will know with me is I don't apologize for creating safe space for women in general, because I won't, because women are still not safe. However, I have been creating spaces for Black women, especially since the resurfacing of Black Lives Matter, because Black Lives Matter is not a new issue. The civil rights issues has been around forever, so it's not new. Some people, those that look like me, this is not a new conversation and a new topic. So when we are talking about misogyny, race has to be talked about within that conversation because it represents a specific privilege. So how does this impact on women, especially women that look like me? Race has an impact on your mental well-being, where you are feeling disconnected, you feel extremely isolated. There's a high risk at the moment of Black women specifically will have a high rise of trauma, depression. Again, reliving, a lot of us, including myself, are having flashbacks of previous racism that we've experienced. But at the same time, what am I also dealing with? Misogyny. And I recently had a situation where I did a video for the BBC where I was talking about the impact racism has had on Black people. And unfortunately, I had to come off social media because the amount of racist comments I've endured, I've never actually experienced. I lived in the UK for 28 years and I've never been called a monkey or baboon, or people had pictures of me on a ship going, asking me to go back home, but within the tone of yet threatening me physically and threatening to rape me. So as you can see, again, I think the picture I'm trying to show you here, this is not just a terrible pandemic, but it's affecting us deeply, even when we are online with people. So from my experience as a clinician, what I'm seeing over and over again, especially with Black women, we are constantly on survival mode. We're not actually living our lives. We are constantly trying to make sure we don't experience racism, that we're not raped, we're not physically attacked. And what does that do? It causes a constant panic, worry, it's lack of self-esteem. We don't really, it's hard for a Black person right now, it's really hard to trust anybody, especially our current political system, when we are having, leaders who are clearly inciting racism and inciting racism, but also now there's been a voice given to white supremacy. So there's a real threat to women, but there's a real threat to Black women specifically. So I think that's something I really wanted to bring into the space. But, many would say to me, but how can, obviously, how can white people be part of this conversation? We are all part of this conversation. Fundamentally, all of us, I wish I could live in a world where I didn't have to fight racism. Obviously, we do all want to fight for the human race, but in order for us to fight for the human race, we have to acknowledge the racism. So Black lives does matter. We have to say it, because that's how we're going to acknowledge the problem. We're going to say sexism exists because that is the issue we're dealing. We have to name the issues. If you don't name it, then we won't be dealing with it. Again, this is what I'm going to keep encouraging, that these conversations continue beyond this panel. And I always say to any white people, my white friends, colleagues, if you want to be part of this conversation, it's important you start amplifying Black voices. It's really difficult when you come to certain spaces and the people don't even look like you. People in higher positions don't look like you. And I know this was something that was organized, also the Feminist Society of St. Andrews has been part of, but I'm going to challenge, these establishments to really look at themselves. Am I actually, if I want to help, is there a representation of those we actually trying to have? So it's really important. And it's important to listen. It's very important to listen. Let me tell you, as a Black woman, it's very difficult that I have to constantly explain to white people what racism is. So it's important, just listen. Create spaces where we can have very uncomfortable, because this is not going to be a comfortable conversation. It's not comfortable, it's not going to be fun. But what we can do collectively is create a safe space where we can have these uncomfortable conversations. It's important you educate yourself. Even though I'm a lecturer myself and I'm teaching others, I consider myself a student. I'm still learning. It's important that we educate ourselves. Ask that question that you're afraid to ask. How you ask is very important. I think it's important we own up to our mistakes and acknowledge your privilege. See, I'm a Black African Somali woman, but I would never compare myself to a Somali woman living in Somalia under Al-Shabaab's laws. I would never compare, because I recognize my privilege in that space. So I can go on for a while, but I know I'm going to be over my time. But for me, again, it's really important when we are having a conversation about misogyny, sexism, to recognize it as a pandemic. This is a real problem. This is one of the biggest wars we have in our hands. Globally, 200 million women are living with FGM. Every 11 seconds, a girl is being cut. Why aren't we out there marching? Why aren't we outraged? Do you know why? Because psychologically, we've been groomed and conditioned that we shouldn't be outraged or speak out when it comes to violating women and girls. And another thing, to the organizers and Natalie, next time you actually facilitate something like this, don't even apologize you created it, because there isn't enough of it. So this is absolutely, and especially listen, I'm the oldest on this call, I already know that. To the young people, on this call, and who have these platforms, you have to use it. You're the most important audience that we have. I logged into this call because I knew I was talking to young people. If it was, a bunch of old politicians, I would have stayed. I wouldn't have logged in. But I'm telling you, this is why I logged in, because you guys really have the power to really make a massive change. All I can do with you now is share my experiences, but you guys have the energy. I'm actually exhausted, so I really would like you guys to take over a little bit. So I'm gonna stop right there, and I want to give people a chance to ask questions. But really, I'm emphasizing this is a massive issue, and look at your own establishments, look at your schools, look at your families. Just because a lot of us in the West think we live in a free world where everything's great. It's not. Talk to the Black friend that you have, and be honest. If you don't even have Black friends, ask yourself that question: why don't I have Black friends? It's important, because we need to look at our environments, and our environment has an impact on how we view the world. But if you don't have access, then what do? You know, so I think I'll leave it there, because I can keep going. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this. And now we have a floor open to discussion. So please do use the safe space, as Dr. Hussein said. It's really once in a lifetime opportunity to ask questions and share your views. And if you would like to speak, just unmute your microphone and tell us what you think. Ask us a question. I just wanted to say that speakers are allowed to ask questions too.
And it's okay not to ask questions too. It's just let it process for a while. There's me, the therapist, speaking.
Now what happens? They're all waiting.
Oh, there is a question coming in on the chat, I think. It's coming from Gustavo. He's asking, what would it take to convince you that the patriarchy has been overcome?
Well, the fact that you don't even recognize that patriarchy hasn't ended, that's a privilege. So whoever thinks patriarchy has ended or we've overcome, that means they have privilege and they can't see it. I wonder if the other panelists feel the same. Just asking.
I would agree with you on that. I think that it definitely is a privilege if you're not recognizing how the patriarchy is still very much alive and well. And very that's okay to have that privilege, but you need to recognize it.
Yep. But this is a chance to really educate yourself. That would be my advice. Go actually and find out. I'd be happy to send texts or articles that you could read. This is a really good chance to do that.
Yeah, and if you prefer to ask a question through the chat, please do.
My question goes a little bit more to the FGM side of things. I was wondering, what experiences have you had that you believe that have sort of normalized like our behavior towards FGM in the developing world in the West, and like how do you think these behaviors allow for phenomena like that to continue happening?
Well, actually, it's very much connected to the previous question. The reason FGM still continues in developing world and also in the West, because FGM does happen in the West, in the UK, the US, it still happens because we have a patriarchal system that says the idea of controlling the female body, sexuality, just controlling women in general. There's an agreement, whether it's done through cutting, whether it's done through beating, whether it's done through killing women. Even with COVID, with this particular virus, one of the things I was worried about was how many women are going to be killed by their partners who are going to be locked up in it. So patriarchy is the reason why FGM still exists, not the communities are just wanting to carry on. No, there's a system in place. And that's why no one's, when I say every 11 seconds, if we said every 11 seconds, a child's legs are being chopped off, that will get much more attention, because the idea of controlling female sexuality is being normalized globally. Just look at even our own so-called free countries like the West, how we talk about women in the media.
I think we have another question coming in. Actually, we have two questions. One of them is from Sean. Can men be allies in the same way that white people should be allies in issues regarding racism?
Absolutely. I think I'm very anti keeping men out of these conversations. I know we need safe space for women, but men have to be part of the conversation. I believe men benefit from feminism. That's because if we live in an equal society, we wouldn't be having the issues that we're dealing with. And I think I would encourage men to speak about this, because you have privilege. And I was saying earlier, if you have privilege, you have the opportunity to make a change. So, part of my work, I run my own enterprise company where I teach companies and organizations on how they develop well-being in their space. And I'm talking to a lot of men, white men in corporate companies. And I'm like, but if you hire a woman in a high position, you are actually part of the, you are part of the solution. It's important you think about that. So men have to be part of the conversation. You cannot keep men out of it.
There's another question from, oh, sorry.
Okay, hi, I have a question, more a general one, but what I can't help but think about when I exist as a feminist, when I see all these issues, I can see specific issues and I can see specific things we can do to make them better. But in general, the question that I ask myself, I want to ask you as well, do you believe that we can truly end patriarchy? Because obviously we can make sure women are better protected, have better rights everywhere, but can we change the mindset of the men, or sometimes women as well, of all the people who live within patriarchy and benefit from it? Can that ever be over?
I 100%, I believe so, because I've seen it happen within my own family. The way I think but in order to make change, the change has to come. So our foundation, so let's just start with our school. So just picture a world when a child goes to nursery, not even primary school, nursery, and we are teaching them about equal rights. What we teach in schools has not worked. Let me tell you, I spent hours learning about algebra, didn't do me any good. I never used it again. But if someone taught me about my body, about my rights, we will have a better society. And that's how we're going to end patriarchy. Because if you're raising boys that they are, they're held at a higher standard than women, that they can rape women and it's okay. And if a woman gets raped, she'll be blamed. That stuff is taught to us. It's not something we just woken up one day. That information has been given to us. So our education system, it's really a great way of actually tackling this. It has to start from the beginning. One organization I'm going to recommend, I don't know if any of you have heard of Laura Bates, who started Everyday Sexism Project. Laura did a great research on the UK education curriculum. What was the outcome? It's anti-women. That was literally the big outcome from it. Can you believe they still don't have the clitoris organ on the biology books? Do you know why that's being removed? Because the idea of women of having pleasure or masturbating is still not acceptable. That's how you deal with patriarchy and misogyny. Because the idea of a girl having a woman pleasuring herself, it's like, oh my God, how awful. That's happening in Britain, in the so-called freedom world, So that's how we will, I'm not saying it's going to happen over one night, but we need to start from the foundation. And our education system absolutely plays a big part in why we have a patriarchal system. Absolutely. And racism too. As a Black woman, I never learned about Black women in my school. That's a racist system. So in order for us to have these change, and this is why for me, talking to you guys is so important, because you will be the future leaders. You will be in these spaces. So it's important that you pay attention to this now, not later on in your life, because I think it's really important. I mean, my daughter's 18. I raised her in a household where she was told she's no different than a boy. She will never be treated. Obviously, now that she's 18, she's gone out to the real world. The world is telling her this, but she knows that she's not going to accept that. But I met women who went to the best schools, extremely wealthy, but still feel she's a second-class citizen because she's a woman, because that was embedded to her from a very young age. So I'm going to encourage you guys not to lose hope. There's definitely a big hope, and there's actually a very simple solution. Just educate boys and girls at a very young age about healthy relationship, about sex, about their rights. It's so important. I wish if I went to the perfect school, I would learn about healthy relationships and sex, finances. I mean, it's ridiculous. Everything that we need, I was never taught in school. It's crazy to me. So we are producing human beings who are actually struggling, and we are learning as we're going along. But what if I was taught about my rights when I was in primary school, and about, what my body, I didn't even know how my vagina looked like until I gave birth. It's crazy, because in school, we're not teaching children about their bodies, especially girls. The clitoris organ has actually been removed, because the idea of a woman, enjoying sex is still seen as the taboo. So that is the real problem. And it's not nuni, by the way, or mini, as people call it. It's called the vagina. It's called the vulva. Because you wouldn't call ear something else. That's also part of the problem. You know, language is very, very important. I don't even use the term FGM anymore. For me, that particular violence, it's actually a serious sexual assault against children, because touching a child's genitalia is a form of sexual abuse. Full stop.
We've got another question about any worth reading books, blogs, and articles. But what I'm thinking is, after the event, we could just have all of the speakers just creating a list that maybe will be worth sharing with everyone.
I would love to do that. Actually, on my website, I recently created a whole archiving space. So I can send you a link on my page that you can all have a look.
That would be amazing. That would be amazing. We also have one more follow-up question from Gustavo about patriarchy. He's asking, when will we know that patriarchy has been overcome? Like, what signs we should be looking for, just in case his last question wasn't clear.
Okay, good stuff. Okay, so we're going to see change, one, when we are actually having more spaces like this, where women are paid equally, when we're raped, we don't get blamed by the legal system. The legal system questions me first. Why was I drunk? Was I wearing revealing clothes? I have seen this happen over and over again. I worked with survivors of sexual abuse. A lot of them don't end up going to court because they're the ones on trial. So into our legal system, education system, health system starts to change. And this is why you guys are so important, because you will be in those spaces. You have to make the change. You have to challenge it. Then we're going to see but it's not going to happen overnight. I think this virus just has told us we've got a big long way to go. But you know, and again, there is hope. I don't want to discourage you all. You know, we can talk about it. There are still places in the world where you can't even have this conversation. You will be at risk of being killed. So we must remember there are people who can't even speak about it. So we have to be an example. So that we are actually talking about these issues. So talking about it is another form of, we are going to be ending patriarchy.
And one last question is coming from Sean again. He's asking whether racism and sexism make each other worse, and would dealing with one issue help fix the other?
Say that again?
It's in the chat. I'm not sure if I think you should all be able to see the chat. Sean is asking whether racism and sexism make each other worse, and would dealing with one issue help fix the other?
Well, unfortunately, some of us, I would say me, I deal with racism and sexism all at the same time. And you have to tackle all of them at once, because they all stem from power. The idea is to power oppress a particular group. I experience racism because my skin is supposed to be oppressed by people who feel they're more powerful than me. As a woman, again, I'm oppressed because, you know, the male space feels they need to oppress me and they need to control. So the idea is power. So if we are going to be dealing with all of them, we have to speak about power. So absolutely, I believe you have to speak about all of them at the same time, because they all connect, in my opinion, and that's just my opinion. So it's important when we talk about race, we are talking about gender, that we are talking about, you know, religion, we are talking about sex and sexuality. All those things are very much connected to all of this. But, you know, being British, those are things we hate to talk about. So yeah, it's a bit of a challenge for me personally. Yeah, we want to fix the problem, but nobody wants to go there.
We have one more question coming from Fatima. Fatima, do you want to ask your question?
Hello, hi Lara. So I have a question, and the question: in your experience, what is the most beautiful thing? What is the most difficult thing you think is about being a woman in today's society? What is the most difficult thing about being a woman in today's society?
I think you're muted, Dr. Hussein, I think you're muted.
Sorry, yeah. So what's the worst thing, what's the worst thing that can happen to you by being part of the society as a woman? I mean, that is a research itself. I mean, but what's the worst thing? I don't even know which one to point out. There's so many. You know, the idea, I mean, I guess for me, if I come back to my own experience, that I'm not physically safe. I don't feel physically safe most times. I think the only time I'm physically safe is when I'm at a friend's house or my house, because as a woman, I might be raped or attacked. I know I cannot walk around. I can't just leave a bar in the middle of the night, just walk home, even if home is 10 minutes. So physically, I'm really at risk. So as a woman, I think the worst thing is I'm not physically. The fact I even have these opinions, from my experience, I've had death threats, you know, rape threats. Unfortunately, I had to move home a few times because of literally, I was physically at risk. So as a woman who's speaking out, from my experience, who actually is speaking out, I'm physically a threat at all times. And unfortunately, you know, look at women in different parts of the world, you know, who are being killed just for taking off her hijab. Look at what's happening to the women in Iran. There's a big movement in Iran. Women are taking their hijabs off, but they've been killed, they've been stoned. The same thing's happening in my country, in Somalia, where I'm from. So there's a physical threat to women. This is not a joke when we're talking about, and it's not like a side project. I want us to stop treating misogyny and sexism and patriarchy like a side project we talk about on International Women's Day. This is an everyday, not, you know, stop my language, bullshit and shit that we're dealing with. We are physically at risk. When I'm in countries where there's rarely any Black people, men think I'm a prostitute. I've had men come up to me in hotels, try to pay me money because I'm a Black woman, I must be a prostitute. So that is an everyday experience. So we're physically at threat at all times.
Okay, thank you so much for all the questions. And I think we're gonna move on to our second speaker, but please do keep the question, let the questions come, keep them coming, because it's really interesting to see what you guys thinking. Our next speaker is Amber, who is a chair of the University of Manchester's Feminist Collective Society, who is also our partner for this event, which we're really grateful for. Amber has chosen to speak today because, as she said, she's tired of the scrutiny that women face under the patriarchy. Amber, we're delighted to have you with us, and the floor is yours.
Thanks so much for having me, for partnering with us on this as well. So I'm Amber. I do history at the University of Manchester, and I'm currently chairing the university's Feminist Society. Very grateful to be invited to speak today. I'm going to be talking about the recent release of WAP by Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion. And I am going to be saying some swear words as well in this, just as a warning. So on August the 7th, earlier this month, Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion dropped their newest single, WAP. To clarify, WAP stands for Wet Ass Pussy, censored as wet and gushy. The music video accompanying the song featured Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion dancing in the WAP Funhouse, a house featuring nude door handles and a host of wild animals. A week later, Russell Brand posted a video to YouTube in which he dubbed the music video pornography. It seems as though men are both unable to conceptualize the male gaze in the first place, but also struggle to conceptualize women taking ownership of their sexuality outside of the same male gaze. I'm going to explore the release of WAP, both the reactions to its release and its merit as art in itself, in relation to various aspects of the intersectional feminist movement today. And I'm choosing to do this because I believe that grounding the themes of today's discussions in such a recent controversy helps emphasize the continued need for intersectional feminist activism. As Dr. Hussein said, this is not something that just needs to be talked about on International Women's Day. It's ongoing and it's constant. 3 months before the release of WAP in May this year, Lana Del Rey posted a note titled "Question to the Culture" on her Instagram. Del Rey began this controversial post by comparing herself to and criticizing a group of mainly Black women, including Cardi B. She claimed this group of women, naming Beyonce and Nicki Minaj among others, wrote songs about being sexy, wearing no clothes, fucking, cheating, etc., and compared her own music to tackling themes of being embodied and feeling beautiful by being in love. If you read the statement in full, it is painfully clear that Del Rey positioned beauty and feeling embodied in opposition to being sexy or engaging in sexual acts. This is a tactic that is often used within our patriarchal system, and it only serves to shame women for their sexuality. Not only did Del Rey imply that to be sexual is to be lesser, she, a white woman, also chose to directly target the sexualities of several Black women. An interesting, but perhaps unsurprising choice from a woman who chooses to emulate second wave feminism. It is no coincidence that Del Rey targeted Black women in this instance. Black women, as has been mentioned earlier, occupy a space that experiences both sexism and racism, resulting in the form of oppression known as misogyny. When we examine the sexuality of white women, it is through a patriarchal lens. When we examine the sexuality of Black women, it is through a patriarchal and a colonial lens. As P.H. Collins writes, the fear and fascination of female sexuality was projected onto Black women. Black women are not allowed to play with their sexuality in the same nuanced way that white women are. Black women's perception as exotic only heightens the sexual objectification that they face. Society has an issue with Black women being sexually empowered. It is a threat to the status quo, and it is a shock to the straight male community who cannot fathom women being sexually satisfied without them. Cardi B has faced a lot of criticism in her time, so I highly doubt she was shocked to the world's reaction to WAP. I also highly doubt that this is the last time the world will react so violently to a sexually explicit song written by and for women. What I don't doubt is that this song is a much needed anthem for women. Its entire length is dedicated to different ways of having sex. And let's be honest, it probably taught us more than many of our school sex education classes did. There continues to be a claim that female sexuality and sexual performance are inherently exploitative, objectifying, and for the male gaze. We need to question this. The male gaze is the exploitative and objectifying force. It is not, and it never has been, women's bodies. There is nothing provocative about the human body. If you need any proof, look no further than the human nipple. When it's only women who are being asked to cover up their nipples, regardless of any other factor of their existence, it begs the question of who the nipple is being covered up for. It's not society, because if it was society, men would also have to cover their nipples. It's not women, because women are increasingly taking joy in going bra-free and letting their nipples show through their clothes. It is the male gaze. It has only ever been the male gaze, and it will continue to only ever be the male gaze. It is noticeable that descriptions like scantily clad or provocatively dressed are rarely, if ever, used about men. In their music video, both Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion wear several different bodysuits, all figure hugging and some cut out as well. I want to highlight here that I had to spend a few minutes searching for a word to describe their outfits that wasn't loaded with patriarchal judgment. Revealing, daring, suggestive, and even slutty came to my mind faster than the actual description of the outfit. It is worth noting how our language upholds the culture that we exist in. Dress codes are only ever there to control us. That is a fact. Women face oppressive amounts of judgment with regards to their clothes. I attended a single-sex girls' school with no uniform from age 11 upwards. And every year our school and the brother school, which was all boys, gathered to celebrate our founding anniversary. In year 7, the first year at the school, we were told to dress appropriately so as not to distract the boys during the service. We were 11 years old, and we were being taught that our bodies were offensive. Since dating my boyfriend of nearly 4 years, I've been asked on more than one occasion if he knew what I was wearing on a night out, as though I belonged to him, as though my relationship status meant that my sexuality, my autonomy, and my personality were no longer mine. For the record, my boyfriend did not care, and if he had, I would not still be dating him. Women are punished for presenting themselves as sexual beings because our sexuality is something to be feared within a patriarchal system. A woman with cleavage is a woman who's confident, and in turn, a woman who is dangerous. The patriarchy relies on women being subservient to men in all regards, especially sex. Why do you think we call women who sleep around sluts, but men who sleep around fuckboys? Neither have particularly positive connotations, but one is distinctly more punitive. I'd like to ask everyone here today to take some time to unpack the double standards that we hold women and their sexualities to. because our society allows men to make rape jokes, but it doesn't allow women to talk about masturbation. If you're unconvinced that the patriarchy punishes women for being sexual beings, look no further than the phrase, the female orgasm. This label only serves to other the experiences of cis women. This label is also incredibly transphobic. Orgasms are not gendered, a truth that may be hard to swallow for a society that insists on gendering everything. The female orgasm is not real. It has never been real in the sense that it's not distinct from an orgasm. The addition of the word female is purely to signify that women can only appropriate sex, sexuality, and orgasms. The same way that we talk about female firefighters or female police officers, the female orgasm is a linguistic reminder that women's experiences are subservient to men's and that we are not allowed to occupy the mainstream. Not only does this enforce a power dynamic, it is also overly focused on a biological classification of gender. There's an obsession with categorizing us based on our genitalia, and it is absurd. Our society's developed beyond this, but it's time our rhetoric caught up. What is the female orgasm supposed to mean for trans men who have vulvas? What is it supposed to mean for trans women who don't have vulvas? The linguistic challenges that are posed by the simple existence of trans people only highlights the unhealthy obsession with gendering that our society has. WAP reminds us that you can be successful and artistic whilst having and talking about sex. Its explicit nature links partly to its genre, but also to the world that we live in. Women are angry. We are angry at being shamed for existing, and we are done being polite to satisfy a population of men that has only ever mistreated us. You can dislike the song all you want, but if you stay quiet while male artists not only sing explicitly about sex, but also refer to women as bitches, yet go into uproar over two black women singing about the same thing, I would ask you to check yourself. You have a right to criticize WAP, and you have a right to your opinion on it, but I'm tired of this criticism repeatedly being aimed at marginalized groups. We hold women to higher standards than men, and we hold black women to near impossible standards. Our criticism does not exist in a void. It exists in an oppressive system, and it is time we start recognizing this. The topic of today's event is sexism and misogyny in the modern world. I find it shocking that in our modern world, we're still having to fight to explain the most basic principles. I find it shocking that in our modern world, we're still having to explain that creating a society that refers to women and sex workers as whores or hoes, but punishing women for reclaiming those same words as symbols of sexual empowerment is sexist. I find it shocking that our modern world degrades women on a daily basis, but cannot fathom why a feminist movement is still needed. It can be really easy to be desensitized to these things, but we cannot give our patriarchal society the satisfaction of staying quiet. We have to remind ourselves that the way we are treated, categorized, and labeled is not right. It is oppressive, it is hierarchical, and it is dehumanizing. Women have sex too. Women are sexual beings. Women are intellects. Women are opinionated. Women enjoy eating, funnily enough. Women like independence. Women are caring. Women are kind. Women are funny. And women can have wet ass pussies. Thanks.
Thank you so much for this. I absolutely loved your speech. And that's one of the things I adore about events like this. I don't know if you guys as well, but I feel that kind of empowerment like inside me. It's like an energy that's coming from you. And it's something really amazing and something special. And it's so important to name the things and like use the name and don't be afraid to say things because like there shouldn't be any taboo around things like this. So does anyone have any questions? Yes, please, Dr. Hussein, floor is yours.
Amber, are you going to have that speech published? Because, but what I'm saying, I first of all, like, I've been doing this for nearly 18, and when I meet young women like you speak like that, it's like, you know what, that fight was so worth it. It was so worth it. So thank you for saying for what you said. Like you're an absolute great example of when, especially when we talk about race here, what white women like yourself should be doing. So I wanted to thank you. That's all I wanted to say. And I think what you need to, that needs to be published. I think more people need to hear what you've just said.
Thank you. That means a lot coming from you. Thank you so much.
I 100%
agree.
agree.
And I like that song too. I mean, Cardi B is one of my feminist icons, in my opinion. Like, really.
It's a good song. It's a good bop.
Anyone else would like to ask anything? I literally think that if you would like to send us over the speech, we'd be more than happy to publish it on our event and our Facebook, and wherever it goes from there.
Thank you. I'll send it over afterwards, definitely.
I sent a question earlier on the chat that was, what can we do to fight misogyny? How can we discuss with manipulated people like Trump supporters?
That's such a hardcore question. I think so. Our society has started running an Instagram account, and it's blown up quite a lot. So we have 20,000 followers ish, and that's been great. But with that has come a lot of the people like Trump supporter-esque rhetoric who'll come into our comment section or our messages. And I'm not sure this is necessarily the right answer, but I think at this point in my life and for my mental health, and to continue doing the work that I think should be prioritized and needs to be done, I personally am not able to engage when it's kind of, if someone walks into a conversation not wanting to be not wanting to listen to the other person. I think that's something that I have shut like my boundaries to. That's just where I draw the line. I just go, I can't put the mental effort into it. And as I say, I'm not sure that's the right answer for ending the patriarchy, but I think that occupying these feminist spaces, these activist spaces, you do have to carve out some sense of sanity for yourself in order to continue doing the work. That's what I'd say.
If I may add to that, actually, personally, having always been very outspoken my whole life, I have had lots of difficulty, especially coming from a developing world, very Catholic country, very misogynistic, and speaking out about issues got me death threats. It got me a hate group chat with my name on it. It got me so many things that, like, I bring them up and I just literally want to cry because it's so exhausting to have to deal with that kind of stuff. And you really can't do much about it, because if you deal with trolls and people like that all the time, what you really just end up doing is burning yourself out sometimes. So sometimes it's just best to let things slide and think of yourself first. And I 100% agree with where you're coming from. Like, it's rough.
Thank you so much for this. There's another question coming in from Sean. What are your thoughts on female Trump supporters and women who advocate against their interests?
I find it really upsetting and frustrating. It's the same with any system of kind of oppression, when you have people, a person who's from that marginalized group, but kind of doesn't recognize how the fact that they are being marginalized by this, when women are like supporting Trump, when he's clearly a rampant misogynist and sexist in many different ways, it's just upsetting. And I think it makes me champion education as well, as Dr. Hussein was saying earlier. Like, it just makes me think we need to start rooting this problem out a lot earlier on, not when we're 19. That's too late. Like, for a society to function in the way that we want it to function, when we're sitting here talking about this like idealistic feminist society on this panel, it is exactly what you said earlier, Dr. Hussein. We need to get to these people when they're like 2 years old, 4 years old, build up these principles. Because currently the principles that you learn at school, as a history student, my entire lens is colonial, the way I view the world. And that's still, I'm only just beginning to unravel it. I'm only just able to, because I'm at university now. And even then, it's not easy. So we do need to fix it a lot earlier and reform the way that our society is built from the kind of ground up, I think.
I have a question.
So can I just add something to that comment in terms of female supporters of Trump? I think it's very important that we're mindful that that we don't push those women away from our spaces. I think we have, obviously you need to find a space where being, you know, you need to keep yourself safe. It's very important. And I know this from my own experience. But what I found also, it's when we create a safe space to have very uncomfortable conversations, we are in a position to really get them to see. It's like you can be holding a mirror to somebody. Are you aware? What are you benefiting from supporting? And it's not just Trump voters. I come from a country where, you know, a government that controls women, and their biggest voters are women. So in America, the Somalis in America end up voting for Trump, even though Trump called Somalia the most dangerous place and in a shithole. But the Somali men were telling people we cannot vote for a woman because it's against our culture. So so it's important to remember that those women who are saying these things or who are positioning themselves in that place sometimes are not in the right environments to even think outside of that. So I just want to say, let's be mindful of that. But there's a clear line somewhere where you have to keep yourself safe.
Yeah, I actually had a question like following on that, because I realize like sometimes with my feminist friends and stuff, when we see maybe like a post on Facebook from a woman who's like clearly speaking against women, who's being misogynistic, who is saying that feminists are like ruining everything and she doesn't want like female politicians or something, we would always like just like kind of laugh it off and say like, well, like the servants of the patriarchy or the maids of the patriarchy. But obviously that's just like a little joke. But I do struggle on like how to, because obviously they are women, and like even if they're like the servants of the patriarchy, they're still the victims. And how do I engage in a conversation with them? Because obviously we hold different views, but we're both suffering under the patriarchal system. How do I just like have a better conversation with them? How do I make them, or like not make them, how do I connect with them? Because there's obviously lots of we can connect about, but I do have this issue of like them holding really different opinions and like me being uncomfortable. Not to come up like patronizing, obviously.
Yeah, I think it kind of, as you've already said, I think the first step is recognizing that these women are not the people we're fighting, right? There is some solidarity to be found in there, but also definitely avoid viewing them as victims. And it's a tricky line to navigate, because you've got to recognize that they're much more than just a victim of the patriarchy. They are their own person. They have autonomy over their decisions, and they also should be held accountable for those decisions. But there is also solidarity to be found. So I guess when talking about those kind of women who, you know, for example, women who are Trump voters, I think the way that I would navigate those conversations is just find the common ground that you have, because there will be some as women, and then just go from there. And even if it's just small, just hold on to that common ground and just occupy that together. And if that's the most you can do, then that's the most you can do. Sometimes you have to just make your peace with that.
Thank you so much for all the questions. Now we're going to move on to our next speaker, who is Arunima from India. And she will share a very different perspective on sexism, I think, as she'll be focusing on how it feels like to be a woman in STEM who was born and raised in India. Arunima, welcome. The floor is yours.
Hello, thank you so much, Natalia, for inviting me. And I had my camera off all this while because most of what Dr. Hussain and Amber had to say really resonated with what I wanted to say. So I was quickly jotting them down on my iPad. So I'm just going to be looking at it, you know, frequently during I talk, just to make sure I cover everything that I wish to cover. So I think I'm just going to start by introducing myself. So I'm Arunima, I'm 18 years old, and I'm a college freshman. That's going crazy, but that's another story. So I come from India, and as much as it disheartens me to say India is still, you know, a majorly patriarchal society. So I was always interested in pursuing a career in STEM because my parents worked for the Indian Space Research Organization, which is, which you could call the equivalent of the, you know, the NASA for India. So from a young age, I was really interested in all of these cool science, technology, and engineering stuff. So when I first shared my aspirations and my plans to pursue STEM as a career, I received so much backlash from my father, who himself was a scientist. And it was him who told me that boys are born better at math and science, and that I, as a girl, don't have it inside of me to excel in a field that has been and that will be largely male dominated. And I think this happens on a very regular basis, because I've always seen my male counterparts be favored over me for no apparent reason. And I felt like there were also times when I wasn't being taken seriously enough, if that makes sense. And then at some point, just reached the rock bottom. And then for some reason, I started feeling that maybe I didn't have it in me to succeed in my career because of my gender. I think what made me feel that way was, definitely gender stereotyping, and also the massive underrepresentation of BIPOC and women of color in STEM. But I also think it had a lot to do with gender essentialism. So I just noted down what Dr. Hussain had to say, so I'm just gonna keep it here. Yeah, so I think Dr. Hussain mentioned about the interconnection of racism and misogyny. And I think I agree with her, sorry, I'm lisping again, agree with her wholeheartedly, because BIPOC youth are ridiculed and just alienated through racial gaslighting. Say, for examples like the angry Black woman or the smart Indian kid, because those stereotypes are so harmful, because they just keep propagating a very, how do I put it? I mean, as I said, a very harmful, stereotype. And I think that racism is such a multifaceted abuser, and it also made me feel alienated at times, because my race, culture, ethnicity, the color of my skin were not conventionally associated with success when it came to the fields that I was interested in. And I think I'd also like to cover the point of colonialism, because people of certain communities like mine, they internalize abuse from their colonizers, and we are also constantly victimized by racism because of the inherent colorism that exists because of this colonialism. And I think, another point that I want to cover is internalized misogyny, because I think it's something that's been normalized for such a long time that it feels almost normal to constantly shun other women and, just internalize the idea that you have to constantly compete with other women, put them down just to feel validated, which doesn't make sense at all. And we also constantly shun each other for, say, wearing too much makeup or not wearing makeup at all, which again doesn't make sense. And I think it's also because of internalized sexism and misogyny that we not only doubt ourselves, but we also start doubting other women. And I think I don't know why I just keep using I think a lot of times, so forgive me for that. But I think there's also this idea that you cannot be as successful as men, and that idea just keeps reinforcing itself and reinforcing the idea of the female race as a subpar and inferior race. But what I believe is that we don't have plural races. We're just a singular race. We are all humans, and every human being deserves to be equally respected. So as I said, I'm Indian, so I think misogyny and sexism in South Asian communities is something that's very common, unfortunately. So they've been so deeply enrooted in, so many different cultures, especially cultures like mine, that when men are born, they're just automatically inducted into this sort of regime that systemically aims to bring down and oppress women. It's not what they're explicitly taught, but it's just the beliefs they're, made to grow up with. Like beliefs like a woman's place is in the kitchen, or that only a man can be the real bread earner of the family. which again don't make sense at all. And what I want to say is I'm not anti-men. I'm never anti-men. But there are some men that I have come across personally that feel the need to honor and protect their male identity and entitlement by just, justifying the perpetuation of sexism and misogyny. And I think Amber also mentioned this. It's that there are people who feel more outraged by feminism than they feel by misogyny, because according to them, they think that feminism is this sort of thing where the female race wants more privilege than their counterpart race, when, oh sorry, my laptop is falling down, when what we truly wish for is equality. And I also wanted to touch base on something else Amber had to say. You're just amazing. I'm just going to be fangirling you for the rest of the summit, if you don't mind. So yeah, the other thing that I wanted to touch base on is that sex is something that's very, deeply stigmatized to the point where females or young girls are sort of discouraged from having sex, when they should be taught that it can be something that can be enjoyable, that can be fun, if it's consensual and comfortable. So instead of teaching them not to enjoy it, I think we should just, be teaching everyone just about boundaries and consent. And coming to my last one, I think both Dr. Hussain and my laptop keeps falling, I'm sorry. Both Dr. Hussain and Amber mentioned about intersectional feminism. So according to me, feminism is not a one size fits all solution. And unless your activism recognizes the marginalization of people of color and is inclusive of different intersections between different identities, then you're not really fighting for equal rights of all women, if that makes sense. And I'm not going to go on much further. And I'm just really excited to hear Paola talk as well. So I think I'm just going to finish there.
Thank you so much for this. It was extremely insightful. And I know we have one question. I'm pretty sure it's for all of the speakers in our panel. It comes from Leonie, and she's asking, how can we involve more guys and men in these spaces? How can we make sure men take an active role in creating equality and supporting women?
Okay, that's a very good question. And I think there are so many answers to them. But the first thing that comes to my mind is just to make men active and responsible allies in this fight against sexism, misogyny, racism, also, as Dr. Hussain mentioned. So I think one way to actively be involved and support this movement is to just be aware of the privilege that you carry, because more often than never, they just don't realize the privilege that they come with, and they sort of project it onto women, if that makes sense. So I think it's really important to be aware of the privilege that you have. And also, I'm sorry, okay, my screen is frozen for some reason. Can you
No, we can hear you. Yeah, keep going.
Okay, perfect. Okay, my screen just froze. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, so yeah, what I was saying is that they need to be active allies by just maybe, just hiring more women, as Dr. Hussain again said, and just being aware of the privilege they have in general. I hope I answered that.
If I could add that, great answer. Don't fault any of it. It's perfect. I think as well, what's very frustrating is the anti-men rhetoric that often comes out in feminist spaces. It's not only just kind of misses the point of the patriarchy, because the patriarchy works in a much more complicated way than just woman versus man, even though it can often end up being like that. But if you look at some of the movements that have come out of this anti-men rhetoric, like political lesbianism, incredibly lesbophobic, incredibly harmful. So political lesbianism was part of second wave feminism, where feminist women basically said, let's just not live with men, cohabitate with men, sleep with men, or just live in these kind of lesbian communes. the reason that's lesbophobic is because it implies that sexuality is a choice. So it's a very harmful narrative to be pushing. And I just think the anti-male rhetoric just doesn't, it actually just creates conflict where there doesn't need to be conflict a lot of the time. And linking to giving men kind of responsibility as allies to the feminist movement, one of the things that our society is doing to tackle consent issues on a university campus is we're working with male sports groups to get them to help us campaign for better consent in sports societies, which is a big problem at university. So I think giving men a space where they can yeah.
Thank you so much for that. I know we have another question coming in from Faisal, if you would like to tune in and ask the question.
Well, hello everyone. So my question is like, as a point, I think like, as I'm already aware of the situation that's in the Southeast Asia, and when you're out being a woman, and sometimes there are like sexist comments. Even like I've seen it, I've witnessed this on Facebook and other social media platforms. So, do you really feel that this kind of comments or any kind of the thing as such should be made criminal offense, or to just like sometimes as part of the discrimination law suggests, and like any other
I think Faisal
I'm sorry,
keeps...
pick up.
Yeah, sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, so do you think that sexist comments should be made a criminal offense?
Okay, thank you so much. That was a great question. So I think I've experienced sexist comments, on roads, I think, almost on a very regular basis, which again is not so good. And in addition to sexist comments, there's a lot of, catcalling and sexual harassment as well that happens on the roads that really go unnoticed. I think, as I mentioned, it's been normalized to such a point where people cannot actually see through whatever is happening. And I think my friends, some of my family members and we've been victims to this thing. We didn't realize it was sexual harassment until someone told us that it was in fact sexual harassment, which is sad when you really think about it. So, I mean, if catcalling or just passing sexist comments could be made illegal, that would be amazing, because I wouldn't have to worry about, just going out of the house at, say, certain times of the day and, just going. I'm 18 years old, but I'm still so scared to just go alone because I've been sexually harassed so many times I've lost count of. So just having a person next to you makes you feel safe, but at the same time, it also really gets to say about the safety of women in your country. So answering to your question, I think it would be a dream come true, or maybe a prayer, answered from the heavens if it were criminalized, and I really hope it happens, although I don't think it's going to happen, but I'm optimistic.
Well, thanks a lot for that.
Can I just add a point to that, actually? In the UK, we now recognize emotional abuse as a form of a crime. And when you are name calling, making somebody feel belittled, when you're saying racist comments, anti-Semitic comments, it's abuse, it's emotional abuse. So it should be criminalized. When you're demeaning another human being, it is abuse. So for me, it's not actually maybe getting a particular symbol of a law around this. I've always been against that personally. I think we already have laws that says you cannot abuse somebody emotionally. And I know I think it's only in the UK that we have that. I'm not sure if other countries have it, but I think that it needs to be recognized as a form of emotional abuse because that's exactly what it is.
Thank you very much for this. I know we have one opinion coming in from Ola. She's saying, I think really important things is to talk about males when talking about feminism, not only women. For example, a lot of males suffer because they are not able to express their emotions. That's just a comment from Ola. I don't know if anyone would like to comment on that.
that's called masculine toxicity. Like, I mean, that's a whole. Hence why, again, we must fight patriarchy, because, like I said before, it's not good for men, because we've created men who cannot express their emotions, and the only way they can express is by being violent. Or, I mean, just look at, I don't want to name any male leaders, but you can clearly see when male leaders are in that position, how they deal with issues versus women. I'm not saying women are angels when they're leaders, but you can clearly see in terms of how that happens. So men are absolutely harmed by patriarchy.
Okay, thank you very much for all the questions and views. And now we're going to move on to our last speaker of today, who is Paula from Mexico. She's currently studying international relations and art history at the University of St. Andrews. And in her talk, Paula will talk about mainly Latin America, but also about the escalating danger of microaggression. I'm very excited to have you with us, and the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. First off, I wanted to thank all of you for having me and for paying attention, for being receptive to whatever I'm about to say. First off, I wanted to start with a bit of a disclaimer and a trigger warning. I'm going to be touching on issues that are quite close to home, considering what I will be discussing is sort of the idea of this sexist pandemic on a much greater scale, well, not on a much greater scale, but on a very, very severe note. And I will be talking about femicide and sexual violence and all of these issues in not very explicit detail, but I will be discussing them. So first off, I wanted to keep that in mind. Second off, I wanted to put in a disclaimer. I am, when I'm discussing all of these things, of course, a white woman of privilege. I come from an upper middle class family. I don't necessarily experience all the struggles that other women around the world have struggled, let alone in my own country. I am definitely not at the bottom of the chain, whatever that is, considering there are so many intersecting issues that have made so many things very difficult for women. So from my social standing, this is kind of my viewpoint, but I wanted to establish this firsthand. So first off, what I wanted to talk about was the idea that, well, one of the most regular comments that I receive when I declare myself a feminist anywhere is the idea that, you know, women already have rights, and the idea that the battle over feminism and sexism is one that's already been fought, when that has ended, and that there is a correct way to fight it if there is really anything left to be fought for at all. And this has been something that has been very, very common in discussion circles around me, especially seeing as, I don't know if you've heard about this, but in Mexico, there's this crazy femicide kind of epidemic going around my country, where around 10 women a day are murdered brutally. And it's something that has made so many women so outraged, not just because of that, but because of the idea of this crazy sexual violence, domestic violence, just all of these things that we as women have to put up with in our country that have made our lives and our existences so restricted and so difficult. And the feminist movement across Latin America that has really gained traction has gained the name Ni Una Menos, which in English translates to not one woman less. So it's basically just the idea, like, we're not letting any more women go through what we have been through. And the movement has taken on so much, momentum that protests have just become super widespread. It's so inspiring to see these images of these women just being out there and being vocal about these issues. And what this has led to is, in these protests, events of vandalism on monuments. I don't even know if vandalism is the correct word, because it's something that connotates that it is a wrong thing. So it's like graffiti on like monuments around the city, and destruction of private property, which lots of people have shown themselves to value more than the lives of women who have, you know, been brutally taken away for so long and no one has ever said anything about it, you know. The idea that protest should be done a certain way, also something that was seen with the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States really recently. The idea that all these people seem to want to dictate how people can protest, how people can speak about the way that they are oppressed, how people speak to their oppressors, and how they want to overcome these issues. It's just such a fraught over issue because it's something that it indicates the fact that a lot of the time marginalized groups are very much kept from claiming their own voices and being able to take over spaces and speak about their own issues without being shamed for not doing it in the correct way, which a lot of the time is passed off as, you know, concern for like private property and concern for, you know, small businesses and all these things, when no one ever cared about any of these issues when it was about, I don't know, like football teams that won matches and all these fans going on to ruin monuments after said celebrations or whatnot. But it's just like the idea that the discussion that we have around all these things is very situational, and the idea of what we should be able to do to fight oppression is not necessarily always in the hands of the oppressed, but has a lot of the time directed itself towards the hands of those who oppress us. And I speak us as of us as a woman myself, and kind of like what the deep problem with this is, and what these microaggressions like ball up to eventually is just such a toxic culture that it speaks volumes about the way that we are allowed to exist in society, not just speak about our issues, but the way that we are allowed to conduct ourselves. So basically, it's just like you see these restrictions on everything, ranging from women's reproductive rights, like abortion is legal upon request in one state in Mexico, and that is not even a state, it's Mexico City. And so many millions of women are dying from clandestine abortions all over the world, all the time. And it's something that's just not talked enough about. So like in 60 countries around the world of, I think it's 197, and this number might be a bit muddled even, I think it might be even less, is in only these countries is like access to abortion, like a proper thing in the hands of women. And it's just this idea that we constantly infantilize women and we don't allow them to make proper decisions for themselves or for them, like for their own bodies. We don't allow them to reclaim these things. We don't allow them to reclaim their voices. And it's something that has just hurt the way that we are allowed to carry ourselves in just like the general vicinity of like our lives. This infantilization leads to things such as the policing of like very basic things in everything. So slut shaming can really range from, you know, it's not just being like a rape apologist, it's policing the way that a woman can dress, it's policing the way that a woman can talk, the places where a woman can go, the amount of things that a woman can do without a man in her presence. It's just all of these things are just so insanely specific and very, very pathetic when you think about it, because they're social facts. They're things that aren't necessarily material truths, but they affect our lives to a astonishingly material of like range. Like they affect us so much that whenever we don't perform within the roles that society has cast upon us, we're often threatened very much in the way that Judith Butler says in her work, where she cites the idea that if you don't necessarily function within a specific gender role or within those specific confines, you are most likely, you know, under threat of like violence, and you're meant to cower down. You're not meant to have self-esteem, which is a lot of the time why women don't tend to carry themselves, you know, with much gusto as men do in society. But moreover, like what I feel is this all leads to is the idea that we as women, we're not allowed to live. we're not allowed to live properly. We're allowed to stay alive sometimes because there's a massive chance that you'll go out there and get murdered just because of your gender, and not only in Mexico but in the rest of Latin America as well, and I imagine so in many countries around the world. But the fact of the matter is that we don't talk about it. We leave these cases impune. There's not enough institutional involvement in these issues that allow women the safety and security to think and know that they are protected by society, but also by a legal system, also by institutions, judges who blame women for things that are way beyond their control. Judges that blame women for getting murdered themselves, after their death. And it's just heartbreaking. But more than anything, it's just the idea that even though it's so common, people still have the audacity to say that, it's not that big a deal and that it's just a women's issue when, 1 in 3 women are abused in some way throughout their lives, according to the World Health Organization, but no man knows an abuser, or no man ever claims to know an abuser. No man ever believes that he has any abuser friends, even though he very much might or does. Which is kind of the idea of where I'm going to enter right now, is the idea of necropolitics, which is it's a thesis presented by Achille Mbembe. And it's the idea that a government can decide when a specific group of people can live and when a specific group of people can die, and kind of just like deciding what a person can do throughout their life, kind of depending on those kinds of criteria, you know what I mean? And the fact of the matter is that we as a society kind of have created a gendered necropolitics, which has allowed women to fall into this category of victim, into this category of, targeted, of just constantly never being able to, occupy space in the same way that our male counterparts are taught that they are able to occupy space. And it's just so restrictive. I mean, it really just goes down to things like Mexico's president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, publicly denying a spike in cases of domestic violence, even though there was a clear increase, after the COVID epidemic began. And he said, instead, I quote, "It was rather an increase in intrafamiliar fraternity." And you have presidents like Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil claiming that, when bread is lacking, a woman is just bound to be beat because that's just the way things are. And we continue to make excuses, and we continue to create social spaces where these things are just allowed. And I guess that's just like the bigger concern. That's just the thing that we need to be looking at when we're discussing women's safety, the way that we police women's bodies, and the kind of freedom that we're allowed to have. So more to it, it's just the idea that breaking down hierarchies, breaking down all of these restrictions that continuously tell us who we can be in a society, it's just so essential, and it's so important to achieving any kind of change, because these socially constructive facts at the end of the day are incredibly just terrible for us. And deconstructing is the active responsibility of everyone in society, because factors like oppressive patriarchal gender roles affect the most fundamentally mundane things that anyone can do. So they can, go further from microaggression to eventually leading to horrible things like femicide and sexual violence, very tangible, very material things. Moreover, this is not a minor issue, and it is necessary to have discussions around it for the women murdered on the daily, for the women who cannot choose for themselves, for the women who die from clandestine abortions by the millions, the women who live in fear of their husbands, and the women who suffer sexual and domestic violence on the regular, and more. And yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to say.
Thank you very much for sharing that with us. And do we have any questions, any views, anything that anyone would like to say? Anyone, anything, add, say, ask? Yes, please.
Yeah, actually, I don't know if you're aware of this, but recently in my work, in terms of, so I'm connected to a few researchers around the world so they're trying to get stats on where female genital mutilation is actually practiced. I'm not sure if you're aware, but we've been hearing cases in the Mayan community in Mexico and Colombia. So I wondered if you actually heard, if you came across women who are also experiencing this, because now there's one of the things I'll do, it's share an article from Colombia where FGM is now something that's always been there. They just didn't use the word FGM, they used the word cleansing. It's so taking women's clitorises meant they're clean. So I wondered if that is something that you came across in your work or heard of. We can't hear you.
Sorry,
yourself.
I'm muted. Yeah. Yes, actually, I had heard of cases in the Mayan community. I didn't know that it was as widespread as that in Latin America. But there's so much misogyny that is, allowed by society, particularly in indigenous communities, mainly because it's just the idea that they have, such low resources and that they are, constantly denied education, denied resources and access to all these things. So it's not like a surprise to me that that might be the case elsewhere in Latin America. But it's definitely pressing and absolutely needs to be addressed.
Thank you.
There is one comment from Juan, I think. He's saying that the crisis of feminicides in Mexico is real and a very sad one. What could be a solution to the situation, considering that the government has decided to turn a blind eye to this?
Okay, so I don't necessarily have the, be all end all solution to all of these things. And it is definitely so awful that the government has decided to turn away from the femicide epidemic that is just so prominent currently. But I genuinely think that if anything is going to change, first off, it should be societal. I do think that societal and legal, more formal governmental change occur simultaneously. But I think that it's very much kind of starting, on a smaller scale, the idea that we should, normalize women being able to speak up about violence, not normalizing it, not normalizing microaggression, not normalizing all these things, because all these microaggressions that I hear on the daily when I'm back home are things that I also hear out of the mouths of senators and congressmen and judges when they're deciding all of these verdicts, determining whether, someone is guilty of femicide or whether someone is guilty of a sexual violence related crime. So it's really about making those minor changes and having those discussions, starting in the most basic places, like in the classroom, as Dr. Hussein brought up before. If we're not talking about these things in the classroom, then kids regularly don't have another outlet outside of these places to be able to, change their mindsets and open their minds. So I think that's probably the most important thing right now.
I think that we have one more question from Juan as well. Do you think it is related to the general wave of violence that the country is going through at the moment as a result of the lack of a steady government, or does it have a different source?
Actually, yes. I read an article about this really recently. It's from a journal. It's called Contexto Internacional. It's more of an academic journal. I can leave the link if y'all want to read that. But it's about the idea that the wave of violence has also, further allowed violence against women to exist because of, the idea that there's a sense of control in the idea of killing and maiming women within the country that isn't necessarily, thought of as regular violence. It enables these things because it is not considered violence. It's considered violence against women. And also Amber brought this up earlier, the idea that we treat women's issues like they're separate from, the greater picture, when in fact they are a symptom of just like a greater central like issue or conflict. And that's definitely something that we need to look on.
All right, I think we're nearing towards the end. So I just wanted to ask all of our speakers if you would like to have a floor for a second and just kind of give us a take-home message, something that we should remember about that's super important that you want all of us to take away.
I think if I had to kind of sum up my thoughts on feminism, I would say that intersectional feminism is the only way forward. And part of being intersectional is recognizing that you as one person cannot represent everyone else. And you need to accept that. You need to platform people who do represent different groups. And you also need to admit when you're wrong and say sorry and fix it, because you're going to make mistakes, because I can't speak for everyone else out there. So I'm going to say something wrong sometimes. So I would just say intersectional feminism all the way. And that involves a level of maturity and humility in that activism as well.
Thank you. Dr. Hussein, would you like to share something, just like a final thought for us to stay with?
Yeah, just really following from that comment, I think one is important we recognize our privileges. We are super privileged, even that we are on this call today. There are women right now. There's a girl who's about to be mutilated, a woman who's stuck in a house with a violent partner, a woman who has no access to any form of finances. So I think it's important to recognize that. However, we must see this for what it is. This is not a side project. This is not on International Women's Day. This is a pandemic. The idea that if you are a woman, you are not physically safe, you are being murdered brutally, as Paula said, this is a pandemic and we must recognize it as that.
Yes, definitely. Arunima, anything from you that you would like to leave us with?
I'm just still letting everything that everyone spoke sink in, because what everyone had to say was so powerful that I'm still, just trying to absorb it all within me. But one takeaway that I have with me is definitely what Amber said about intersectional feminism, because unless you're really aware of the different marginalizations that exist and acknowledge them as different entities, you really cannot be just advocating for their justice unless you really, I'm not making sense, but unless you really just take care of all of the communities. Yeah, that's it.
Anything from you, Paola?
Of course. What I just wanted to add to all of this is that whoever you are, no matter what your gender, no matter what situation you're in, you're not alone. It's so difficult to find groups in which you have active sorority, fraternity, all of these things, things that are promoted. And I think it's about time we got over our individualism, this stickler individualism that's kind of paired with whatever is going on in the world today, that has told us that our struggles as marginalized groups, or our struggles in relation to issues related to marginalized groups, aren't valid. All I wanted to say is that you're not alone. You will never be alone. And you should always try to find a way or a place to talk and create a safe space about these things, because it's important, very much.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to say that I'm very grateful that I can be a part of this event and to have you guys by my side talking about all those issues. And as I was listening to all of you, I feel like the take-home message for me and for everyone, I think everyone would agree, is try to create a safe space. It doesn't necessarily have to be a lot of people. It can be just you and your friend, but it can be a space where you both feel comfortable to explore the topic. And please do question the things and pay attention to details, because it's all about the details, about the things that we very often ignore, like not notice. And that's where we have to look really closely. And I feel like the most important thing is like educate yourself and really do ask questions, because there are people out there who may know way more like about that particular issue than you do. And it shouldn't be scary to ask the question, because they are out there for us to explain the things. And as we educate ourselves, then we become better and we can perhaps educate others. So that was the take home message for me. And thank you very much for all of you like for joining. And that's the end.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, all you talented, amazing women, for speaking alongside me. It's such an honor to be considered, part of the panel with all of you. Like, wow, thank you so much.
I feel the same about all of you. I'm actually very excited about the future, because I get to meet amazing young people like you guys. I should report this to the older feminists who are very exhausted. And so it's hope.
Hang in there.
All right.
Thank
Take
you.
care, everyone. Have a great day. Bye.
You too. Bye bye.